here today. And I don't want to run off without bringing you up to date on basically what we're talking about. So for those of you who have been through this, just bear with me. And it doesn't hurt to go through this again because it's a very significant thing. But what happened here, what was so interesting, was revealed in a newspaper article, which Joan has. If any of you don't have the article, then you ask Joan, and you have some of these articles, right? Newspaper articles from the Associated Press, you have them? Okay. Now, the reason is because I want you to be able to walk out of here with documentation. You can't document for anybody that this is true or this, but you can document this is the basis upon which we're reaching a conclusion. Okay? And that's what, in every church in the world that I've never seen anybody prove anything. And I just, I have no patience or time anymore to consider things that can't be proven. I don't care whether it's fundamental or it's New Age. It doesn't make any sense to me unless you can prove it. And so that's where we're coming from. And so you are provided with documentation when you come here of everything that forms the basis of what we're discussing with you. And today I have 3 new pages. Now, you should have, after you get done today, have 79 pages of documentation. If you don't have the 79 pages of documentation, if you don't have any of it, you see Joan, and if you come back, we'll provide it to you. In other words, it is scientific documentation. There's no New Age stuff. There's no religious stuff. There's no spirit. It is scientific documentation of everything we've said. And that's important because if somebody says, well, where does he come up with that? And you can say, well, it's right here. It's in Grollier's Encyclopedia. Or it's in the Academy of Science, or God knows, But this was the interesting thing that occurred. Now, what science did, the scientists in Austria, they took 3 photons. Now, photons are light particles. When an atom gets excited by heat, it emits an energy that you see as light. Now, there are photons that emit in the ultraviolet spectrum that you can't see, or the infrared spectrum that you can't see. This is in this particular wavelength, you can see this. Okay. Well, anyhow, what they were trying to do, and they labeled them A, B, and C. And what they were trying to do in the laboratory was get A to C. And what they found out they had to do is they had to first entangle B with C, which they did. Once they got B and C entangled, they come up with the law governing photons and their operation of the subatomic particles. Though they're one, they have their opposites. This will go that way, and this will go that way, but yet this may go all the way 1,000,000 light years this way, and this will go 1,000,000 light years this way. But if one stops or changes, the other will stop or change. Okay, so they got C and B entangled, and when they did that, they were now able to get B and A entangled. And when B came over to A, something strange happened. When B came over to A, B actually destroyed A. But C had to maintain its opposite polarization with B, so C changed its polarization. That's a law of nature. And when it did, it changed it to A, which was now opposite of B. And so A became one with C. In other words, A moved to where C was. So what basically, in so many words and a little simpler, they killed A, and instantly A showed up 3 feet away. The light was destroyed, the photon was killed, and it reappeared 3 feet away. Now, when we looked at this, we said, well, yes, I was curious about this. Basically, that's the same way. If we look at photons as light, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, photon. It says in John, God is light, photon. And Jesus says, you are the light of the world, photon. So if we're photons, and we take this as us, this is God, and this is Jesus, we can do the same exercise. Jesus and God are entangled. But yet they're opposites. Jesus is human, God super. So that squares. Now, Jesus comes into us. And when Jesus comes into us, we become one with God. And it works. So in other words, what it does, it explains the principle behind the Bible. That this is the way all subatomics, this is the way all the invisible forces in the universe work, and we saw proof of it. Okay? And so that is the basis here of what we're talking. So what we're, like what Jesus would say in the Bible is no one can come to the Father but by me. Well, that's true. No one can come to C but by B. If B doesn't come to A can't come to C. So it's true. And that process we're talking about is true. And the process is the change of polarization. And that is the change of the angle. When C changed its angle, it then was on the same plane as A, and so they could come to one another. So the change of the plane, the change of polarization occurred to C when B came to A. Okay? So the change of God opening himself to us happened when Jesus came to us. But of course, if you're Buddhist, you could use Buddha. If you're Hindu, you could use Krishna. I'll use whatever you want. Doesn't make any difference. You can use chicken soup, oatmeal, and asparagus. It doesn't make any difference. It's B, A, B, and C. It's all going to work anyhow, no matter how you do it. But it is curious that that is the function, the way the Bible teaches us that all three, we're light, Jesus is light, and God is light, which means they're photons. And so then they go and start to saying, you can't get to God but by Jesus. A can't get to C but by B, so it does work out. And the experiment in Austria, which was in the newspapers all over the world through the Associated Press, documented that, and you can have a copy of that before you leave here. Now, this whole process brings us to something that started this whole thing, which we talked about a long time ago, and that was the Coptic key. You remember the Coptics, who were kind of pseudoscientists of ancient Egypt, said they received a key from Jesus, who said you'll have to have this for getting to the other side, and that was this 8-circled symbol, the word Ozio, and the number 4555. So we started to study that. We started to look at these things because, it's interesting. Now, when we looked at this, well, maybe this could have something to do with 8 planets because of the way the circles at the end. And lo and behold, right after we discussed this, the scientists and astronomers discovered 8 new planets, didn't they? And every one of those planets lined up scripturally with what was in the Bible. Every one of them. Started off at Virgo, ended up at Leo. And just exactly from the Virgin to the Lion. And so we followed that. And then, right after that, came the 9th planet, and the number 9 meaning consciousness. And where do you know? That was in the constellation called the Crown, or as it's labeled, it was the Crown. And then we saw, finally, after all of this, the picture from Hubble showing us this tremendous shot of the eye in the sky. As Jesus said, if your eye be single, your body will fill with light. And we looked then and we saw through Hubble the single eye of God, the third eye, which is there. And that's the picture from Hubble, what was in the National Geographic. I mean, isn't it amazing if God's proof? He said, well, let's show him proof. We'll put it on the front page of National Geographic. That should get their attention. Didn't. Nobody paid a bit of attention to it, did they? Nonetheless, there it is. Okay. So, when we were thinking about that, we then came to the realm of Ozio, which we had to understand that, and 4555, the number 4555. And at this time, we'll focus on Ozio for just a minute because of the Austrian experiment and the polarization change. The polarization, if you take 2 pieces of polarized glass, like in sunglasses, and if you change their angle, you can prevent the light from going through. No light can get through. Then you change the angle back, and light can go through. What's interesting about this word Ozio, that was part of this symbol from Jesus to the Coptics, which was thousands of years ago, is when you break the word down. All right? And if you brought your stuff with you, and I'm sorry for those of you, I forgot to bring the material for those of you who don't have it, but I promise you that if you come back, I'll have it for you. But if you look on page, let's see, Oh, 76. That's the one we gave last week. Okay, page 76. Now you see two things here. Azo is a light compound. So azo, the word azo, or the root word azo, means light, and zeo is the word zeolite, which means crystal filter. So here we have light filtered by crystal. And what's so interesting about that now, we learned this a long time ago, but what's so interesting about that now is in light of the Austrian experiment, this is exactly what happened. Because we had A, B, and C, in order for C to change its angle or change its polarization, that light photon then would have to filter, would have to change in its filter structure in order that A could become one with C. So that works, which is interesting. To me, it's very, very interesting when things work like that, and that one does work. Okay? Now, let us consider the word given in the key as light filtered by crystal again. Light whose movement is allowed by the change of the crystal, the change of the polarization. And what we're seeing now in the Austrian experiment, of which you'll get a copy, is that this worked, they did it, and it's exactly how nature worked this change in the photons. Now, LCDs, have you ever seen liquid crystal? LCDs, where you have maybe a computer or a calculator or something like that. LCDs are crystal displays which rely on polarized light to make information available to you. Like a sugar solution, a liquid crystal rotates the plane of polarization until you can see the light. What they're talking about now, like I have an LCD laptop computer. And what I was saying to them, why don't they make these laptop computers, you know, for the regular PCs, the big ones, and because they don't do to your eyes what the regular ones do, the X-rays. They don't put out the X-rays that the other ones do. So anyhow, Ozio then, given to the Coptics thousands of years ago as part of the Coptic key, has a relevance to the experiment in Austria. And that's something that we have to set aside and put under the microscope, because that's very important, because it was the polarization that allowed A to move. I mean, you have to understand something. A was killed. A was destroyed. It was wiped out. I mean, it was killed just like a human being dies. When a human being dies, you say, well, you know, they're dead, they're gone. But what happened? What happened was, when they killed that light, it appeared 3 feet away. But they had destroyed it. It reappeared. So it opens a whole tremendous room for us to look at this and study these things. See? So if Ozio is polarization, and C changed its polarization to become one with A because of B, then the Coptic key is beginning to reveal this part of the process of the very movement of us to God via Jesus, or whomever you want to discuss it with. So let us take a step into the realm of the invisible now, together, as we consider all this. We have, like we talked a moment ago, we have A, B, and C pretty much entangled. Okay? And that leaves, well, let's not entangle it yet. We've got B and C entangled. Or if we want to, you know, in a religious context, we got Jesus and God entangled. And I don't think anybody would argue that that's a reasonable idea. Okay, that leaves A, us, off by itself somewhere. We're off by itself somewhere. If you're going to entangle B and C, you'd have to, you know, draw a line, and you know, like that, you'd have to entangle them, and the straight line can. Now to bring B to A, you have to go like this. Okay, and then A to C, another line like that. Okay, you have a triangle, don't you? Or you have a right angle. Because when I started looking at these angles, I says, you know, wait a minute. If B and C are together, and A is somewhere else, then if you bring A and you start connecting B to A and then A to C, then you have. So I started looking. If you would put overhead 25 on, you just put the light down a teeny bit out. You know, put it. You'll be able to see. And so what I ran into when I started looking at, that's fine. the angles, that's fine, that's good, was this. And I said, the sine of angle A is the ratio of the lengths of B and C to A and B. But all I wanted to show you was there in these angles was the same principle that was at work in the Austrian experiment, you know. What I'm saying is the same thing. Now, what I want to show you is if you could put overhead 26 on. Overhead 26 shows white light entering a prism. Okay? And this is interesting because what happens is the white light enters a prism and then deflects or comes in at an angle in all various colors. The colors of the spectrum, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue, which, you know, as we've come up to the conclusion, this is really Joseph's coat of many colors, and that's what it is. See? So in both cases, then, the Austrian experiment and overhead 26 that we're looking at now, we're seeing white light, which on an angle enters the universe and then enters us. And then what we'd have to say, okay, then this is an angle of light, isn't it? Certainly it is. And it definitely enters the Earth on an angle. No question about it. Light enters the Earth on an angle, so that's fine. Okay, thank you. You can put the light back on. Now, so we got to stop here. Let's stop here after we've looked at that. And let's think, because we're running directly into a misunderstood word. And that is the word angel. What is an angel? What is an angel of light? And of course, in our religious ideas, we have people with wings on them, you know, flying around and whatever they do. Okay. Could the 3 photons in the Austrian experiment be angels of light? Ah, that would be interesting. And why are these religious things called angels in the first place? Well, I mean, all the different words or names that you could come up with, why are they called angels? And when to me, that's the way you have to that's the way my head works. If I'm saying, there's an angel. I want to, so the first thing that comes into my head is, why is it called angel? You know, why not, you know, root beer or something? Why is it called angel? Must be a reason. And then when you start looking, it gets very logical. And that's the most important thing that you and I can share together, that God is logical. Everything that we do, all of our lives, from the time we're born, is based on logic. Our schooling, our jobs, our raising our family, all this is logical. Then every Sunday we go to church and just immerse ourselves in everything that is bizarre, totally illogical. And that becomes the basis of our lives. And we make sure our kids go and get trained in this illogic, you know, bizarre stuff. Okay. Now, we understand that for A to get to C, there's got to be a change in polarization. We've beaten that to death. In other words, the photons, or light particles, before we become enlightened, are all over the place. That's what's happening. These light, they're all over the place. That's like us. There's no way we can get to C. There's no way we can get to God as long as our photons are like this. No way. And I'll tell you something. You know what I'm saying? You can pray. You can go to church. You can join the choir. You can go to Bible studies. You can do all these things. You can lay hands on people. They can lay hands on you. You'll never move A to C. Never. Why? Because you have to do it scientifically. There's a scientific way that A moves to C. And the only way that A can move to C is if B comes into A. And the only way that all of this can be done is polarization. And what is polarization in you is meditation. You can only change your polarization by meditation. There's no other way. No other way. You can get in a car, and you say, I am laying hands on the car, and the car is going to take me to New York. No, it isn't. You're going to have to drive it. And that's what's going on here. If there is a change of the angle, say, now, what do we say? In order for A to get to C, there's got to be a change in polarization. The photons or light particles are all over the place. But if there's a change of the angle and all the vectors are moving on the same plane, then we have polarization. In other words, from all of these particles, suddenly we get a wave moving, and everything flows, A to C. Everything's fine. That's the only way A can get to C. No other way. Now, I'm going to give you page 77 of the stuff. All right? Page 77. You just got it today. Try to move a little quicker if you can. Okay. There you go. That's those 15 minutes in front of...
Or converse.
Okay. All right, you got your stuff? Now that's page 77. Many of you need 1 to 76. I understand that, and you can get that from Joan. But anyhow, this is 77. What you've got in your hands is how I arrived at these ideas. I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. I'm simply saying, let's look at this. Let's be a little intelligent. Let's be a little mature, and let's think about these things. All right? Okay. For those of you, they'll get around to you soon. Now, if you look at 77, okay, you look at the vibration or vector of a light wave, okay, at random angles. If you look on the very top where it says polarization of light, the moving points of a transverse wave, blah, 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 of the light wave, the magnetic field is considered ineffective, maybe blah, 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 if the electric vectors of a group of transfer waves are at random angles. In all directions, the light is said to be unpolarized. In other words, you're all over the place. Basically, put this into consideration with your mind. You don't know which way you're coming, you don't know whether you're coming or going. And you're trying to find God. Okay. Now let's read the next. Conversely, if the electric vectors are all along the same plane, the light is said to be polarized. Some materials can induce phase differences, blah, 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 blah. Other materials called polarizers. Now listen to this. Other materials called polarizers transmit only waves with electric vectors in one plane. The remaining waves are either reflected or absorbed in something else. So only that part of you, only that photon which is inside of you that is vibrating in harmony can get through to C. The rest of it can't. Why? Because that's the way it works. You spent your lives going to church and talking about God's kingdom. This is the kingdom of God. Instead of talking about spirit and soul, start talking about photons, because that's what exists. Spirit and soul don't. You say, well, I believe in the spirit. Well, where is it? Nobody's ever proved the existence of a spirit, but they prove photons all the time. Because photons exist. Those are the subatomic particles. And I'm not saying, when the ancient people used the word spirit and soul, they were trying to describe photon, but they didn't know what they were. They knew something was there, but they didn't know what. Okay? See, that last sentence, materials called polarized, only waves in that one plane. So when you get into meditation and you start changing your polarization via meditation, then you start moving on that one plane, and then C can get to, A can get to C. Okay? So the polarization, the ability to get A to C, or U to God, depends on a change of the angle of B coming to A, or Jesus coming to you, or Krishna coming to you, or Muhammad. I don't really care who it is coming to you, but B has to come to you. This photon has to become one with your photon so that you then can be one with this photon after you die. But there's more to this. And this is the important and exciting part. When you realize this all happens after death, but what about life? What do you say if you become B? If B comes into you through your meditation, now you become B because you're destroyed. And that's what the Bible said. It is no longer I who live, it is Christ who lives in me. It is no longer A who lives, B lives here now. So now what can you do? Through your meditation, you as B can go to A who is somebody that may be sick in your family. And when you go to B, and when you go to A, then you're going to bring A into a oneness with C where healing can occur. This is the way it works. And we'll get down the road in that. In other words, there's a logical way for all of this to occur. This is what's called laying hands on the sick. Don't let anybody put their hands on you because they can have grease on their hands. And then laying hands on the sick is talking about moving photon from one angle to the other. Now, the vibration of this vector or light wave at random angles. Did you see where it said that in the very first paragraph? Is unpolarized. But on the same angle, it becomes polarized. These particles are, now if you're there, if you could go back to page 71, if you have that material, you'll see that on page 71, looking under gauge boson, you find that these photons act as messenger particles. This is what's so interesting. Here you have photons moving at different angles. And they're changing, they're causing that which is dead to come alive. And they're changing all of these things. And these are all photons. And you'll see that when you get the article. That's the experiment. But the important thing to understand, and I can't emphasize it too much, is that science calls photons messengers. They're called messengers. That's really interesting. So what we have here in photons are angles of light that act as messengers. Angels of light that act as messengers. Now go back to page 77. Now we just gave you. Look down the next paragraph. Angel, according to many religions, spiritual being created by God. The word angel comes from a Greek word meaning messenger. The angel is a messenger. The photon on an angle is a messenger. Could there be anything connected? Obviously. I mean, that's where I'm coming from. Yeah, that's what it is. So now we look up this word, angel. One who is sent, the messenger. Thus, an angle of light is a photon, is a messenger. Okay? Because we know that scientifically. We have that written in our science book. An angle of light is a photon, is a messenger. An angel of light is a messenger. The same. No problem there. Now, from the Greek word angel means messenger. If you have your stuff with you and you go to 14I, okay, 14I in this material that I gave you, and if you look at 14I, you see the word angel. All right? Now, this is what's interesting. You see here, for those of you who don't have, okay, the word angel at the top comes from the Latin angelus. Angel, from the Latin angelus. Okay, fine. No problem with that. The word angle, if you go down one into the middle, from the Middle English, angel. Okay? And the word angle, from the Latin angelus. Are the ancients who wrote this calling them angels because they knew they were angles of light who brought messages to you? Of course. Or it's an awful coincidence. Sorry, okay? So then is the messenger, which is an angle of light in science, called an angel of light in religion because it actually is an angle of light. In Austria, the entire experiment was centered around angles of light. B, C, entangled, then coming with A. Now look back to the stuff you just got on page 77. I just gave it to you. On page 77. Look back to there. You look under angels, and you see where it says that angels traditionally are servants of God. You see that? And messengers between God and human beings. Well, you just saw the angle of light on the screen up here, coming through, white light, and then coming through into the color spectrum. And if it came from above, we'll say it came from God to human beings, to you and me. Now that fits, doesn't it? Absolutely. Now, let me share something very interesting with you. Very unique and, again, indicative of the involvement of the visitors of light. And what I'm telling you is that all this was set up for you by an intelligence from another plane who put this all together for you to find. And I'm trying to help you to find it, to see it. But let me show you how this works. So, when you look at names, you know, they played games with us. For instance, we said, who is the most famous, what is the name of the most famous person in gambling on the East Coast? Trump. Of course, that's a gambling term. And what is the name of the most famous gambling person in Las Vegas? Win. Okay. Now, all of computers are built around logic circuits, which are called gates. Who is the most famous man in the computer industry? What's his name? Okay. All right. Now I told you that Om is the chant. Remember when people go into meditation up in the mountains and Himalayas and all that stuff, and they get into meditation and you hear them going, Om, Om. Basically what they were doing was restricting or changing the flow of current that was going up the spine to the brain, so that the brain, the mind, could function the way it was supposed to without an overabundance of electricity. You know, of course, that all of your appliances at home have to have resistors, or else if too much current will blow the thing out, which is what happens to a lot of us in our head. So they chant Om in meditation. Okay? Now, what was interesting is that the international measurement of electrical resistance was found to be Ohm. But they were chanting Ohm long before the 1700s, when the measurement of electrical resistance was discovered by George Simon Ohm of Germany. That's who found it. Now, if his name was George Simon Schultz, what would they have been chanting up in the mountains? Schultz. Because it was all set. Okay? All right. So now you have spent here 40 minutes or so with me, and we've been looking at angles of light as angels of light and photons in the Austrian experiment. Now, electromagnetic radiation that we can see runs from 4,000 in violet to 7,700 in red. And the way they do that is measuring the wavelength, measuring the angle of the wavelength in order to determine, you know, what light spectrum you're in. The discovery was made by a Swedish scientist. Okay? And remember, what he is going to discover is that by measuring the angles, you can measure the wavelengths and come up with electromagnetic radiation spectrums and so forth. His name is Anders Jonas Angstrom. If you look on page 77 of your material I just gave you, it says angstrom, a unit of length equal to centimeters wavelength, also called angstrom unit after Anders Jonas Angstrom. So Mr. Ohm discovered Ohm, and Mr. Angstrom discovered angels. Now, you might start to get the clue that somebody's pulling your chain, and they are, waiting for you to say, hey, what's going on here? You know, what's going on here? So, the movement of photon at death that we were talking about, as we receive messages and send messages, are via angles or angels, and you measure this force of angels in a word called angstroms. So the messenger is photon. Photon is an angle of light. And look what the Bible says. Go to page 67 in the Bible that you have, if you have it in your hand, in Exodus chapter 23. I mean, you know, come on. If nothing else, this is neat stuff. This is interesting stuff. I mean, to me, it's just fascinating. When I started studying the angles, and I'm saying, well, you know, where does word angstroms come from? That's pretty weird. And then you look up, and the guy that was Mr. Angstrom. And I got Mr. Ohm and Mr. Wynn and Mr. Gates. And all, you know, too good. It's too good to be a coincidence. And it's very important for you to know, because what you can know, as you understand it, is there is an intelligence standing right behind you, ready to move in here and show you the way, and show you the way. But they require you to leave religion far behind you. It knows nothing of this stuff. And remember again, unless you move A to C, you can never see God. You can never be one with God. And you cannot move that by talking or praying or singing or going to church. You can only move that by doing your meditation and changing your polarization. And it will change for you. It's not something that you have to say, how am I going to do? Change my angle? I'll meditate like this. Well, that's silly. Because you don't have to do anything. What do you have to do when you eat food? Do you have to digest it? Of course not. You have to say, I think I'll grow some more hair, which would be a good idea for me, but I mean, you know, you can't. Your heart beats, you breathe. You want to screw yourself up, try to adjust your own breath. Everything is done automatically for you. And when you go into meditation, this change of polarization is done automatically for you. That's what's so neat about this. Okay. But look what it says in Exodus 23. And stay there if you would. Exodus 23, verse 20. It says there, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. But now we know what it is. We know it's an angle of light. It's a photon. To bring you to the place which is prepared. Not just after you're dead, but while you're alive, if you'll take this seriously. And you'll do it. And yet all of the religions have screamed at me and screamed at us for all of these things that we teach. An expression of this light. And if you right where you are in Exodus 23, if you go down to the next verse, down to 21, look what it says here. Beware of him. This is this angle of light. And obey his voice. Provoke him not. For he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you shall obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. And you've wondered all of your life, how come it doesn't work? Because you've never tried it. You have never tried it. You've done everything that the religion said to do, and they hadn't a clue as to what to do. And so now you're finding that this is what has to be done. B comes to A and makes us one with C. The polarization, which is the obstruction to us in life and death, is most graphically demonstrated in a story in the Bible that's kind of silly, and they make it silly so that you don't believe it, but you know, they out there in these churches, they do believe it. And there's a guy named Balaam who's riding on an ass, which is a donkey. You know. And he hits the donkey, and the donkey turns around and says, what'd you do that for? That's silly. But you see, when this polarization is set up to the point, and I'll be done here in a minute. This polarization, when the angle is as it is, if you're not meditating, you're all over the place, you know, you cannot get to see. There's an obstruction. There's a filter here. There's another filter here. We saw that in the filters when we looked at the other overhead. Now, how are you going to get through here? See, you're coming through like this, and your wave, and the God side is going through like this. So how is that? You've got to get like that. How are you going to do that? There's an obstruction here. What you've always heard this to be, in your religious terms, is Satan. You'll also get to understand it as somebody called Samael. All right? And let me show you Samael at his best. doing some talking, although they don't call him Samael. You'll have to take my word for it. That's who this is. Let's just look at this, and then we'll go. I believe it. I ripped this out. You have to put it out. Okay, let's go. Let's just look at this. The story here is that Balaam is on top of this donkey, and they're riding along. And the donkey sees the angle of light, which is very consistent with the animal's ability to see things and hear things that we can't. And the donkey freaks. You know, what is this? And so he falls down. You know, the donkey's freaking out. And this guy's hitting the donkey, and the donkey's saying, what the heck you do that for? Anyhow, go to page 139, Numbers chapter 22. And then we'll get out of here. I'm very happy that I was able to do this because I've been coughing up a storm, and I was scared to death, and so everything worked good. Oh, what I do want to give you 78 and 79 to take with you. You know what? Maybe we won't do the donkey until next week. Won't we? You want to do the donkey? We'll do the donkey. Did you hear that? Oh, do the donkey. God. Okay, if you look then at Numbers, you got it there? And here if you say, look at verse 27. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, and remember this is an angle, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he hit the ass with a stick. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and the donkey turned around and said, what did I do to you? What did you hit me for? And Balaam said unto the donkey, because you have mocked me. Well, I mean, here's a guy that's talking back to a donkey anyhow, you know what I mean? If there was a sword here, I'd kill you. Okay, so anyhow, let's get out of here. Verse 32, the angel comes. This is Samael. The angle of light speaks. And look what Samael says in verse 32. Now remember, what this really is, this is the filter that doesn't allow this polarization to get through. All right? And Samael says in verse 32, the angel of the Lord said, what'd you hit the donkey for? 3 times. Behold, I went out to withstand you because your way is perverse before me. And the donkey saw me and turned from me 3 times. And unless she turned from me, I would have killed you, and I would have saved her. And Balaam said unto the angel, I've sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, to displease you, I'll get me back again. So right here we have a picture of an angle or an angel who stands in the way, an angle who blocks the way. And if you look at page 77 in this material, you look at polarizing filter, you'll see that it allows only waves vibrating in a certain direction to pass through. You see that? A transparent glass that allows only waves vibrating in a certain direction to pass through. It's very important as we connect the story of the angel who blocks the pathway with that of Samael who blocks the path and requires one to know the symbol Ozio and 4555. For those of you who don't know about the 4555, come up here after it's over, take a look at this. 4555 is a galaxy in the constellation Coma, which is mother and child. And we had the fortune of being able to get a picture of it off the internet, and that's a picture of 4555, and it's kind of special to us, and that's why we have it up here. Okay, so it would be crystal polarization that would either allow you to flow through or have your path blocked, and that depends on your meditation. And I'm not simply talking about at the time of death. Now, I want to provide you with more stuff. Okay, so we'll do this, and then you can get right out of here. There is page 78 and 79, which you'll make as part of your thing. Now do this fast because they're really going to get up in arms here. They've been sitting here a long time. They want to get out of here and go on Route 9. For what? I don't know.
Because it's 9. It's higher time.
Yeah. Okay. Real fast. Everybody. Okay. Now, you and I will go over these things in the coming weeks, but I wanted you to have it, and if you start being good, maybe you'll bring these things once in a while. But if you don't, you don't. That's okay, too. But if you look on the page 78 of the material, I have highlighted reflection, which is angle, and polarization. Okay? And if you look under nature of light, I have highlighted photons, which are interaction of light and matter. And I have highlighted reflection and refraction, the angle on a substance with a higher index. I've underlined polarization of light, random angles unpolarized, the same angles polarized. And I've underlined interference and diffraction. When light beams may cross, they may interfere with one another. You can see that, okay? What the heck kind of noisy place is this? All right, what's he doing? You got that? Okay. These are the angles of light. In other words, I just want you to have that. So if anybody says, where the heck does he get that from? You got the documentation. That forms the basis of what we're talking about. Okay? No problem. Now I've given you 79. And I want you to meet somebody who I've always looked at as a mentor for many years. He's the father of modern philosophy. His name is René Descartes, and he's from France. And I have highlighted under René Descartes that he's the father of modern philosophy. I have highlighted that he experimented in the science of optics. Now, René Descartes said this. René Descartes said that where man and God meet in the human body is at the pineal gland of the brain. Okay? Now, you would say, well, who the heck is he to say that? You know, another boob making a statement about the pineal gland of the brain. But this is the kind of guy like this. These are my ministers. These are the kind of ministers I like to follow. Okay? He experimented in the science of optics. He attempted to apply ration science and mathematics to philosophy. He held nothing true until he established grounds for believing in it. He argued the existence of God. And I have highlighted that in optics, he discovered the fundamental law of reflection, the angle of incidence equal to the angle of reflection, and paved the way for the universal theory of light. And you have documentation of that. I think he's a pretty credible witness when he says the place where God and you meet is in the pineal gland of the brain. He's not a missionary. He's not a minister. He's a scientist, and just look at that. He discovered the fundamental law of reflection and the angle of incidence. He paved the way for the theory of light. Okay? All right. I don't want to keep it on. We'll look at the rest of that as we go along. But René Descartes is very, very important because you see what I'm saying to you. If somebody says, oh, well, it's the pineal gland of the brain, and then somebody says, well, you know, where's he? You know, as you can see, this guy is eminently qualified to talk about light and reflection of light in the human body and so forth and so on. And so he is something that I think we want to pay a lot of attention to. We covered a lot of stuff, and you know, it just goes on. But I can't be more clear to you when we study these particular things. Try to say, is there a logic for what we've shared together? And if there is a logic, then think about it. And is it possible then by you meditating that your polarization will change, which will open you to universal light? And if that is the case, then it's just tremendously, you know, the implications for your life are tremendous. And remember that Joan has the article from the Associated Press about these experiment in Austria that start, and you're more than welcome to have one. You have them, huh? If you don't have one, would you just raise your hand? Anybody else? Do you have one? You have one? Bob and Margaret don't have one. Okay. So, I mean, there it is. And it's not written in the New Age Journal or the, you know, Crystals and Feathers. This is written in the Associated Press and something that happened in Austria. Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing this time with us.
Please visit our new website at www.hiddenmeanings.com. That's www.hiddenmeanings.com. Thank you.